How's everybody doing? Okay, so welcome to the Western Red Cedar tutorial. Just a couple of things. Well, there's a lot of things I would really like to say, but I know I can't say them. Like, I'll give you an example, like about the political climate, in Canada right now. And I know if I do, it'll just squash it for everyone. So, but let me just tell you just a couple of quick stories first before I get on with this tutorial. There were two men that, like mentor types that were the most influential in my life growing up. The first one was my pastor, who lived to be, I don't know, 87, I think, or 88. And just bear with me there because these stories are linked together in a sort of ironic way. He told me just before he died that, and nobody knew this, in the little church that we grew up in until I, reached adulthood and moved out into the world. But um, he told, myself and my father and so on that his first wife and daughter were killed in I believe it was 1943, I think, in the St. Lawrence River on a ferry called the Caribou, which was sunk by a German U-boat. And I was like, wow, he never told anybody that his whole life. And so I went and found a book because I love history. And I went and found a book on it wasn't the Battle of the North Atlantic. It was, sorry, I can't recall the name right now, but it was, the Battle of the St. Lawrence River. And I looked it up, and sure enough, the ferry was there, and they said that the loss of life, mother and child, and it's just unbelievable. Which brings me to the second story of my short story, that is, of my uncle, many of my uncles were in the Second World War. They were veterans. They were Canadian veterans, and they fought in the North Atlantic first on corvettes, chasing U-boats in the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. And my uncle Bill, who just before he passed away, I was with him, and he didn't talk about the war that much. Like when he had a few, a few foam tops, a few beers, he would get into it with me and tell me a few things. But I asked him one question that I'll never forget just before he died, and we're sitting on the porch on a warm, sunny July afternoon, and I said to him, I said, Uncle, what does it mean to be a Canadian? And he never said a word to me. He just looked at me with those, deep, dark, steel blue eyes that he had, and he said, nothing. But tears began to roll down his cheek. Man, I'm telling you, I never, ever forgot that. That he fought for the infrastructure and the freedom that I benefit from, and all the younger generation benefits from, that is now slipping away, right? And that's a tragedy, and he knew that. And I guess one of my appeals is, it's not maybe to the boomer, because I think they know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, even when it comes to that U-boat story, before I just close here, remember the movie, it's the best war movie ever made. It's called Das Boot, right? And even the very commander on the U-boat wasn't a Nazi. Like he thought Hitler's socialism was idiotic. What a story that was, right? So I don't blame the people that sunk the Caribou, that killed my pastor's wife and child, because I don't know if those men, what their ideology was. They were in the service. But the ideology that was being pushed by the government of Germany at that time was clearly not embraced by everyone. But anyway, let's move on to the making of the Western Red Cedar. And as you can see, this particular scene is really starting to evolve into the vision that I've had. I didn't see it like really coming out this way, you know, because we get an idea and we get a plan. Like I have a basic plan of the footprint, and I don't know if you go back when I started to foam carve like this area here, um, you know, you'll see where I said, oh, look at it. Like I didn't really plan this sort of wedge shape, but I did think about it though in terms of composition. I thought, you know, I'm going to leave because I added a chunk of foam, and it was that moment that I added that extra chunk of foam that actually helped me create this sort of wedge entryway into the scene that sort of tapers down and just sort of reinforces the distance and perspective, even though it's only 4 feet long. Like it really is. Like it's like that's only 4 feet we see there, but it actually looks, you know, a lot further, doesn't it? Right? And this again is part of the point I've always tried to make about building in perspective and trying to understand composition and how it works when we look at our layouts, right? As a sort of scene, like within the aperture of this camera. But anyway, I'm going to go into the tutorial now. It's a little bit comprehensive and extensive, but it really covers all the aspects of fairing an old growth tree or any tree into a bank like this, like the way it is. And it just that alone can really make a scene kind of come together, because it ties together like the right of way, the riverbank, and the shoreline in a way that's very harmonious. You know, it just works, right? So I'm really excited now. So because now I have this established scene, it's like the first chapter in the story. Now I can start writing the story. Now I can start evolving. Like someone said, oh, do you have a plan for section 2 or 3? No, not really. I do have a plan, like progressively in my mind for section 2, like the shops and so on, and then the old growth forest. Like you think this is dramatic. Wait till you, like I want to up more when you go into section 2. That's the idea, you know, like sort of. But anyway, as far as the scene, like the plan, I didn't plan the whole layout, like, but I did put more emphasis on this section. So once this is established, this is enough for me now. Like I get up in the morning and I'm just as inspired as you are when I see this, and now I'm excited, right? And I'm just going to slowly let it come. I'm going to let the creativity and the ideas, I'm going to think on it, sleep on it, and just keep evolving on it. Do sketches, drawings, just play around, which I'm doing. And the scene's just going to start to come together beautifully, I think. And now you can see why the river hasn't been painted, right? And now you can see why the brewery hasn't been painted. Because I like the negative space, because it allows me to see this wedge of scenery and balance it out and get it to work. And then I'll frame it up with the river and the brewery, right? Then it'll all just sort of come together, okay? Let's have a look at the Western Red Cedar. Okay, so I have all these cedar limbs built up now, and they've been wrapped onto the wire and they're dry. They have a nice stiff finish, you know. Beautiful cedar limbs, I think. And so what I'm going to do now is I want to knock some of this green down. I don't like the stock green. I don't like the stock colors of anything really, and I just want to tone that down. And the best way to paint all these, again, is to spray them with an airbrush. If you rattle can these, this paint's just too heavy. So you can use thin, flat paint. And once again, I'm going to use flat green XF5. It has a nice sort of cedar limb green, you know, for the basic color, and some of the other color will show through anyway, so That's what I'm going to use for this. So, you know, I'm just going to pile them up. I'm going to spray some of this green, and then I'll just flip them when I'm happy with it. Okay? Okay, so I'll just show you quickly how I dress the flare in the butt of the tree here. So we've got the balsa wood applied, right? Just randomly, sometimes I'll lay, you know, flat sections of balsa down, or I'll stand them upright like this. So this is a spruce. It doesn't have a lot of flare to it, but you know, they all vary. Like sometimes you'll see a Douglas fir that looks almost symmetrical right into the ground, and then you'll see another tree 5 feet away, and it's got, you know, big root system exposed above ground. So you want to just I like to look at photos, and then somebody mentioned about, oh, when I put it all away I get more into it, and you know, they raise a really good point, because study photos, study the real tree, and then when you get into it, put the photos away. Don't try to copy the tree exactly. You just bog yourself down. Okay, so and then what I do is I take some fiber paste. I love this stuff. This is, well, I have all the golden products, you know, so you'll see them on my bench now and again. They all have a purpose, you know, depending what you're involved with. But this one I really like because it has a beautiful, it dries to a fibrous texture. I use it for tree textures. I use it for concrete. I use it for rock work. Like I use it, like I paint it on thin. I add water to it. I use it thick right out of the tub. You just play around with this. Just, you know, and I use generally a brush like this, like a 1/2 inch wide. And the more ratty the brush, the better. Okay, when it's sort of flared out like that, I really like. Okay, so generally what I do is I just wet the brush a bit, like with some water, and then I take, you know, I'll take some of this out now and just put it onto a tray and then seal it up again. Like, don't leave this stuff exposed to the air any longer than you have to. Okay, because you might have times where you don't use it as much, and you don't want it to stiffen up prematurely on you. Okay, so I just take some like this. And now that I have this, sometimes I like to wet it down a bit too. Just it helps the balsa wood especially too to kind of swell up a bit, and the grain opens up and it takes the texture paste with it. But this stuff is, it just sticks to almost anything. You know. So I just lay it on. I don't worry about the water content in it. If it's got a little bit of water and it goes on smoother. And then you'll see I just glob it on and then just start working it in. And as you're working it, it's almost like, you know, carrot cake icing or something. But as you work with it, it stiffens up a little bit over time, but I just love it. Like if you put it over, like, see how this is all scalloped along here? That's just from the knife. I just tapered down with an Olfa knife, and then, well, there was a split that kind of happened here, and I just left that. See that? So when you put this texture paste on, you know, it see that? It just leaves a nice barky texture. Like this is a real excellent way, especially for the ON3 people that love to do the logging. You know, that's what prompted this with me back in the day, except I used to use celluclay. They never had this texture paste at the time, and I used celluclay to do this. And then when I was in the museum, we made molds from pool cues. I just sculpted clay over pool cues. And we made molds and just poured the trees out of resin because we needed, 1,000 of them or whatever. But when you're building an individual tree like this, like a feature tree, it's a lot of fun actually. This is probably the funnest part of tree construction, is actually doing this, these old growth trees. And I like to build them in threes, at least, like 1 or 3 or 5. I've talked about odd numbers. It's an artistic principle. And see, look, see how you can just lump on like that? I mean, I just threw that on there, right? And watch, like that. I'm going to leave that maybe as a burrow. Because burrows occur all the time. I mean, if you're ever out in the bush, I used to work in the bush. My goodness, some of the bizarre tree trunks that I witnessed in my day were just like works of art in themselves, like sculptures. See, so this is very forgiving product. Once again, if you like to do trees and you're a tree guy and you're not using this stuff, well, you're just hobbling yourself because of how fast it works, and it just loves paint. Like, it just dries a beautiful absorbent type texture, and you can drill it and add to it. See, so that's almost already done, and that only took me like a few minutes, right? Okay. So we'll just get the top of it here. And if you're feeling a little like you're stalling out a bit, well, then just put it down and leave it. And then revisit it. Okay, so I want to show you how I flare in or fare in a tree into a multiple level varied texture surface like this. So I want this tree to look like it's growing out of the bank. The actual real tree is actually down almost on the beach in the rock and into the side of the soil here. So this one's a little further up on the bank. So you can see I have a center dowel already plunged down through the dry celluclay with the foam. There's 2-inch foam under here. So that'll hold it in place generally. So, but I want to be able to remove this tree. Like a tree like this, I don't want to glue in place and then plaster all this in, because what if I want to pull the tree? Like I may have to get this. I mean, this building flat just pops out. It's wild as well. They're convertible, meaning it can be easily removed and put in place and you can't tell, right? And I want that, as most of you may or may not know, Glover Row was built that way. I could take it down in 15-20 minutes, and I could probably set it up in a little bit longer time, generally set it up, but everything was like that. The trees, the buildings, all the major model components were built just to sit in place, tight but not glued in place. And you won't be kicking yourself if you ever have to move the layout, or you need to do a revision or get into work at something, or even to photograph. Like, what if you want to get a camera in here? You can move the tree, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stem wire here, and I'm just going to place it into the sort of large grain features on this, or the trunk features on this model here, like this. And then I'm just going to cut, and then I'm going to CA that to the tree. So these wire stems will give me a good guide to use fiber paste to mold this back into the tree, and then I can repaint it a base coat like this, because this will get a final color coat anyway. So this is sort of some base layers, but that's how I'll do that. Okay, so this part's important as well, that I just want to point out quickly here. If you remember in the tutorial, like these flares on the butt here were made from balsa wood, right? And then fiber paste over top. So fiber paste has a fairly flexible, very tough coating to it. Takes paint well. It's just exceptional product that I really like, as you know. And here's one of the reasons why. So I want to add this. I want to extend this root here. So I'm just going to slice a piece out of there like that. See? That's about the same diameter as this stem wire. Now I can take this with a bit of CA. Okay? And just lay it in there. Like that. Okay? So, and then I'll cut that off where my finger is, and then when I pull this off and take it to the bench, I basically have a framework now. I can add a few more at the rear, but I have a framework now for the root system to to make that tree look authentic. Okay, so I've applied two colors. Thin wash is this light JN gray, Tamiya, or Vallejo equivalent, like a pale blue gray will work. But I like the JN gray because it has a bit of green in it. And then I applied this linoleum deck brown, but this has had some orange added to it. Or you can add earth too to tone it down a bit. But I like that little bit of orange, make it a little more rusty color. Now I'm just going to use some linoleum deck brown XF79. It's a red brown wash. Okay, I'm going to use quite a bit of water again. Okay, so now I'm going to add some shadow into these grooves in the bark here. And I like to wet things down a little bit just to help the paint to blend nicer. So I'll just wet it down, just the insides. And I've got some dark brown here. It's a black and red brown. You can use black with red brown or black with you can use green, you know, really dark green. It's really up to you again. I add a little bit of green to mine, like in this case, but it's black, brown, and a little bit of olive green in there. So, and I just like to work some of that color in. This is fairly thin. Once again, just water. Water and Tamiya, right? You can use Tamiya with water equally well.